So going into this video, there's going to be two things you need to know. One is why Johnson & Johnson is being sued, and two is a move called the Texas two-step, wherein a company that's being sued tries to push all their liabilities onto a subsidiary. But let's start with the first thing. You've probably heard of Johnson & Johnson. It's one of the largest and most well-known healthcare companies in the world, and it's been producing medical and healthcare-based products for about 150 years now. However, in recent years, Johnson & Johnson has faced a growing number of lawsuits, many of which are related to its talc-based products. Basically, some 40,000 people sued Johnson & Johnson in a class action lawsuit, claiming that Johnson & Johnson knew that their talc-based products contained asbestos, which is a carcinogen. Now, it's worth knowing that Johnson & Johnson has been sued a lot over its 150 years that it's been in business, and by and large, it does tend to win these suits, with about 1,500 talc-based lawsuits specifically being dismissed by courts. But in this instance, it looks like maybe they'll get the short end of the stick and be forced to pay out billions of dollars from these cases. This is, by and large, thanks to a 2018 Reuters investigation that found some internal memos and reports along with some confidential documents that suggested that Johnson & Johnson actually knew that there was a possibility its talc-based products could cause cancer. But instead of paying out these lawsuits, Johnson & Johnson has decided to try and drag out the legal battle as long as possible. And this is actually a pretty common practice with large companies. If the payout is more than it would cost to drag the legal battle out for 3 to 5 years, then it's actually beneficial to do this. And this is because things change. See, the plaintiff might decide that it's not worth it to drag out the battle for years and years, or the plaintiff might run out of money and be unable to continue the legal battle. Or in more morbid cases, it's possible that the plaintiff dies, either from healthcare related issues related to the lawsuit or just in some accident. In addition to dragging it out, however, Johnson & Johnson decided to do what's called a Texas two-step, which is the second thing you need to know in order to understand this video. This is where a company creates a subsidiary and moves all of the liability for legal claims onto that subsidiary, and then after that subsidiary has taken all the liability, it then declares bankruptcy, significantly limiting the amount of money it will be forced to pay out. In the case of Johnson & Johnson, they created a subsidiary called LTL Management that was designed to take on all the liability for all its talc-related legal claims, and then just a few days after it was created in 2021, it filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The idea here being that LTL Management, and by association Johnson & Johnson, would be protected from having to pay out billions and billions of dollars in lawsuit claims that the plaintiffs are now entitled to. Now, obviously, this move was strongly criticized, with many people condemning it for being nothing more than a shell company that was created for the sole purpose of shielding Johnson & Johnson from paying out their legal liabilities. Johnson & Johnson, for their part, claimed that, quote, "This filing is intended to resolve all claims related to cosmetic talc in a manner that is equitable to all parties, including any current and future claimants." And farther down in the press release, they basically say they're giving $2 billion in a trust in order to pay out the current victims in the lawsuits. It is, however, worth pointing out that even with the $2 billion payout to current plaintiffs, this would prevent any future talc-based lawsuits from coming to Johnson & Johnson. This is because the company that holds all the liability for these lawsuits is LTL Management, and they're bankrupt, and as such, they probably won't be able to be sued anymore. However, in a move that is going to be referenced for these kind of legal cases for decades to come, a judge actually blocked them from doing this. And this is huge because it sets a very important legal precedent. Because imagine if every large company was able to do this, where they just created a subsidiary whenever they got sued for doing anything at all and then pushed all of their liabilities onto that subsidiary and then had it just declare bankruptcy. They would end up having to pay almost nothing despite the fact that they were in the wrong. Every company ever would start doing this. It's incredibly cheap and surprisingly easy. However, with this most recent ruling, the judge basically is saying that Johnson & Johnson needs to be held accountable for the things that they didn't tell people about their talc-based powders. The lawsuits aren't done, however, as Johnson & Johnson will continue to use the aforementioned drag it out as long as possible strategy, but this is at least the first step in victims getting justice for deceitful marketing. It does, however, lead to a larger debate, wherein critics argue that companies like Johnson & Johnson have a moral, if not legal, obligation to compensate people who have been harmed because of their products, whether or not they're sued over it. On the other hand, proponents say that Johnson & Johnson has the right to protect its assets and minimize exposure and lost revenue over lawsuits, and it has a duty to its shareholders to try and make their investments profitable. They also argue that if anything horrendously egregious has happened, that the US government would have stepped in by now. But since we're not really seeing that, Johnson & Johnson is in the right here as they protect their company from financial losses. Now, whichever side you land on, whether you're for Johnson & Johnson or against Johnson & Johnson, I really am curious what your thoughts are, so make sure to leave those in the comments and I promise to try and read every one of them. Before you go, if you like this video, you'll probably like that one, and I'll catch you next time.